I grew up with Grandma at the heart of every family event. Birthdays, Thanksgiving, even random weekend cookout, she was always the one in charge, or at least the loudest person with an opinion. She made the rules, she served the food, and she gave you a death glare if you dared to leave the house without eating just one more plate. It was like a command performance every time, and as much as I loved her, sometimes it could be. A lot. You know how older relatives are, they think their way is the only way, and you just go along with it because it's not worth the fight. But things had changed in the past few years. Grandma wasn't the force she used to be. Her knees had given out first, and then she got hit with a couple of bad health scares. After a stroke last year, she just slowed down. These days, she mostly stayed in bed, only getting up if someone physically helped her. The family put on a brave face about it, saying things like, "Oh, she's still sharp," or "She's doing great in physical therapy," but we all knew the truth. The woman who once whipped up Thanksgiving dinner for 20 people wasn't going to be walking into any party anytime soon. Even sitting upright for a few hours was exhausting for her. When I got engaged, I knew planning the wedding would be tricky. My partner Liz and I wanted something intimate. We weren't going full Pinterest rustic barn wedding, but we wanted a vibe. Simple, chill, and most importantly, manageable. We didn't want a massive family circus with 200 guests, just the people closest to us. And when you've got a big family like mine, that's already a challenge. Everyone expects to be invited, even your third cousin's ex, boyfriend's mom. It was impossible to avoid stepping on someone's toes. At first, the conversation about Grandma didn't seem like it would be a big deal. I mean, no one wanted to admit it out loud, but we all knew she wasn't in any shape to handle a wedding. Liz brought it up gently one night while we were sorting out the guest list. "Hey," she said, pausing over the spreadsheet, "have you thought about how we're going to handle your grandma?" I knew what she was getting at, but I played dumb for a second. "What do you mean?" "I mean, she's not doing great. Would she even be able to make it to the ceremony?" Liz asked. She was always careful when talking about my family, especially Grandma, because she knew how close we used to be. I sighed and leaned back in my chair. "Honestly, I don't think so. She can barely get to the bathroom without help. Getting her to a venue, keeping her comfortable all day, it might be too much for her." Liz nodded. "Exactly. And we don't want to put her through all that stress. I mean, if she was in better shape, of course she'd be there, but—" "No, I get it," I interrupted. "It's not like she'd enjoy it anyway. She'd be miserable after the first hour." We sat there in silence for a moment, both of us knowing this wasn't going to be an easy call. Family decisions never are. The plan was to have the wedding at a botanical garden about an hour out of town. It was beautiful, but also not exactly wheelchair friendly. Even if we rented all the special accommodations and assigned someone to care for her the whole time, it still felt like we'd be dragging her along just to prove a point. After mulling it over, we made the decision. We wouldn't send her a formal invitation. We'd explain it as a logistical issue and make sure she knew it was out of concern for her health, not because we didn't want her there. We figured Grandma would understand. She wasn't one to sugarcoat things. If anything, she might even appreciate being spared the trouble. But yeah, we underestimated how much this would hurt her. The first sign of trouble came from my Aunt Linda, who loved to stir the pot. She called me a few days after the invites went out. "So, I heard Grandma's not invited to the wedding?" she asked, her voice dripping with that fake, concerned tone people use when they're fishing for drama. "Hey, Aunt Linda," I replied, already bracing myself. "It's not like that. We thought about her health, and honestly, it would be way too much for her. She's been struggling, you know that." "Mm-hmm," she said, clearly unimpressed. "Well, you better call her soon because she's not happy. She feels left out, like you don't care." "That's not true," I protested. "We were trying to do what's best for her." "I know that, but she doesn't. And you know how stubborn she can be," Linda added. "She's been crying about it, saying how she raised you, and now you're just pushing her aside." Great, I could already feel the headache forming. Grandma crying wasn't something I handled well. She wasn't an emotional person, so when she did cry, it hit hard. But I also knew how Linda loved to exaggerate. "I'll call her," I finally said, hoping to put an end to the conversation. "Good, you should. Family is everything," she said, like she hadn't just spent the past 5 minutes stirring up drama for sport. After I hung up, I sat on the couch, staring at my phone. I didn't want to make that call. I knew Grandma would hit me with guilt in ways that only grandmothers can. But if I didn't, it would only get worse. I could already picture her telling the entire family how her favorite grandchild had abandoned her. I decided to wait until the weekend, hoping to mentally prepare myself. But things escalated faster than I expected. By Friday, half my cousins were texting me with subtle digs about respecting elders and family loyalty. Apparently, word had spread like wildfire, and everyone had their 2 cents to throw in. Still, I told myself it would blow over once I explained the situation to Grandma. I figured she'd see reason. After all, I wasn't trying to hurt her, I was trying to protect her. But I was wrong. The guest list for a wedding is like walking through a minefield. No matter how much you try to avoid it, someone's going to get offended. I knew that going in, but I thought we'd handled most of the tricky parts, already cutting distant relatives, saying no to +1s for people we hadn't seen in years. But Grandma? I didn't think she'd be one of those minds. Liz and I sat on the couch that Saturday, laptops open, scrolling through spreadsheets like we were corporate accountants, instead of two people trying to plan a celebration of love. We were down to the wire, now venue capacity was tight, and every extra guest meant reshuffling tables, reprinting invites, and squeezing in more catering. Okay, so what's the final head count looking like? I asked, rubbing my temples. Liz squinted at her screen. 120, give or take. And that's with us cutting out a few coworkers and some of my dad's golf buddies. I nodded. Yeah, my parents wanted me to invite some of their church friends too, but I told them we couldn't. They weren't thrilled, but whatever. Not my problem. I glanced at her hesitantly. So, about Grandma, you still think it's best not to invite her? Liz set her laptop aside and sighed. I do, babe. I know it's hard, but we're not doing this to hurt her. We're doing it because we care. She can barely sit up for more than an hour without getting exhausted. You've seen her, though? You really think she'd enjoy a 5-hour wedding? No, I admitted. She'd probably be miserable by the end of the ceremony alone. Exactly. It's not just the ceremony either. We need to hire someone to help her with transportation, make sure there's a wheelchair ramp, have someone on call for emergencies. Liz listed off the concerns like bullet points. We don't want to put her through all that. We're trying to protect her, not exclude her. She was right. Logically, it all made sense, but it still didn't feel great. Okay, so we just need to explain it to her clearly, I said, more to reassure myself than anything. Make sure she knows we're not leaving her out on purpose. Maybe we can plan something special with her after the wedding, like a private dinner with just us and my parents. She'd probably like that. Yeah, that could work, Liz agreed, giving me a small smile. As long as we're honest with her, I think she'll understand. I believe that tour, at least I wanted to. Grandma was practical. Sure, she had a dramatic streak when it came to family gatherings, but when it came to serious matters like her health, she didn't mess around. I thought she'd appreciate us sparing her the stress of a long, exhausting day. But we made one crucial mistake. We assumed. And you know what they say about assumptions. A few days later, I finally worked up the courage to call Grandma. I wanted to get ahead of any rumors before Aunt Linda's gossip tour got out of control. The phone rang a few times before Grandma picked up. Hello? Her voice sounded weaker than usual, like she'd just woken up from a nap. Hey, Grandma, it's me, I said, trying to keep my tone light. How are you feeling? Oh, you know. Same as always, she replied with a sigh. I'm just lying down right now. My legs have been bothering me more than usual. Yeah, I figured, I said, wincing internally. This wasn't going to be an easy conversation. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about the wedding. Oh, I've been wondering when I'd hear more about that, she said, her voice perking up slightly. Have you picked out my seat yet? I hope it's not too far from the action. My stomach twisted. Well, that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about. There was a pause. What do you mean? Liz and I were thinking, I started, choosing my words carefully. With how your health's been lately, it might be too much for you to come to the wedding. We were worried about how exhausting it could be with the travel and all the sitting around. Silence. Too much? She repeated slowly, as if the words didn't make sense to her. You're telling me I'm not invited to my own grandchild's wedding? No, it's not like that. I rushed to explain. We were thinking about what's best for you. We didn't want to put you through something that might be too hard on your body. It's not about not wanting you there. We just didn't want you to suffer. I see, she said, her tone suddenly cold. So you've decided I'm too much of a burden to bother with. Grandma, no, that's not what I meant at all. Then what exactly did you mean? She snapped. Because from where I'm sitting or lying, I suppose it sounds like you're leaving me out of one of the biggest days of your life, like I don't matter. The guilt hit me like a sledgehammer. I tried to salvage the conversation. We were going to plan something special for you after the wedding. Just us. A private dinner or... I don't need a pity dinner, she interrupted. I need my family to include me. But I guess I'm not worth the effort anymore. Grandma, please, don't do this, I begged, feeling the tension tighten like a vice around my chest. I'm tired, she said flatly. I need to rest. Goodbye. Click. I stared at the phone in disbelief. That hadn't gone at all the way I'd hoped. Liz, who had been sitting nearby and listening, gave me a sympathetic look. Was it bad? She asked softly. She thinks I'm cutting her out on purpose, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. I tried to explain, but she didn't want to hear it. She's hurt. I'm sorry, Liz said, squeezing my hand. Maybe she just needs time to process it. Yeah, maybe. But deep down, I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of the fallout. And boy, was I right. Within days, the whisper started spreading through the family like wildfire. Aunt Linda must have gotten to everyone because suddenly, my phone was blowing up with passive-aggressive texts from cousins, uncles, and even people I hadn't spoken to in years. So, I hear Grandma's not invited. Interesting choice. Family is supposed to come first, you know. Wow. Didn't think you'd go there, but hey, it's your wedding. I gritted my teeth and ignored most of the messages. I didn't owe these people an explanation. But the pressure was building, and I knew I couldn't dodge it forever. The more people talked, the more I started to question myself. Were we wrong to leave Grandma out? Should we have tried harder to make it work? I didn't have answers yet. All I knew was that the storm was faster than I expected. I knew Grandma was upset, but I thought maybe after a few days she'd come around. You know, let the sting wear off a bit. I didn't expect her to rally the entire family against me like I'd just kicked her out of a family reunion. But that's exactly what happened. The first sign came from Aunt Linda. I should have known she'd jump on this the moment she saw an opportunity for drama. I was in the middle of errands when my phone started vibrating in my pocket. I glanced at the caller ID. Linda. I groaned internally. I picked up. Hey, Aunt Linda. Hey, she said, drawing out the word like she was about to deliver some terrible news. So, have you talked to Grandma recently? I called her the other day, I said cautiously. Why? Well, she sighed dramatically. She's been really upset. She's saying you didn't invite her to your wedding, is that true? I froze for a second. I knew how this was going to play out, but I couldn't stop myself from trying to explain. It's not what you think. We didn't want to stress her out with the long day and the travel. It's for her health. Uh-huh, she said, and I could practically hear her smirking through the phone. That's not how she's taking it. She's telling everyone you don't want her there, that you think she's too much trouble. That's not true, I snapped, feeling my frustration spike. I called to explain that to her. I was trying to be considerate. How is this getting twisted? Oh, you know how things are in this family, she said, her tone way too casual for someone actively throwing fuel on the fire. People talk, and Grandma's been crying to anyone who'll listen. You might want to do some damage control before this gets out of hand. Great, I muttered under my breath. Thanks for the heads up, I guess. Of course, sweetie, she said, like she was doing me a favor. But you should really talk to her again. Family comes first after all. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, just staring at my phone. Family comes first. Sure. Easy for her to say when she wasn't dealing with this level of guilt and backlash. By the time I got home, the texts had already started rolling in. The group chat was lighting up with passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. Uncle Pete. So I hear Grandma won't be at the wedding. What's going on? Cousin Rachel. Wow, that's surprising. You sure about this decision? Aunt Diane. I always thought family events were about togetherness. Guess times have changed. I threw my phone on the coffee table and sat on the couch with a loud sigh. Liz walked in from the kitchen, holding a mug of tea. What's wrong now? Take a wild guess, I said, gesturing toward my phone. Apparently, the entire family knows about Grandma not coming, and everyone has an opinion. Aunt Linda's been stirring things up, and now it's a full-blown drama fest. Liz frowned and sat next to me. I thought you explained everything to Grandma. I did. She didn't want to hear it. Now she's telling people I don't want her there, and everyone's freaking out. Liz took a sip of her tea and sighed. Okay, well, maybe you should call her again. Clear things up before it gets worse. Worse? I laughed bitterly. Liz, it's already a mess. People are acting like I committed some unforgivable crime. Babe, I know it sucks, but if you don't try to smooth things over, they're just going to keep talking, she said gently. You know how your family is. She wasn't wrong. My family had a long-standing tradition of turning molehills into mountains. I ran a hand through my hair, debating whether I had the energy for another round of explanations. Eventually, I grabbed my phone again and reluctantly dialed Grandma's number. It rang a few times before going to voicemail. Great. I left a message, trying to sound as calm and sincere as possible. Hey Grandma, it's me. I just wanted to check in and see how you're feeling. I know our last conversation didn't go well, but I really want to explain things better. Please call me back when you can. Love you. I hung up and leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. She probably won't call me back. Liz placed a comforting hand on my arm. She will. Just give it time. Time didn't help. Over the next few days, the whispers and side comments got worse. Relatives who barely spoke to me suddenly had so much to say. Even my mom called me, clearly caught in the crossfire. Hey, honey, she began, her voice tight. I've been hearing some things. About Grandma and the wedding. Let me guess Aunt Linda called you, I said dryly. She might have mentioned it, Mom admitted. Look, I understand your reasons, but you know how sensitive Grandma is. She's really hurt. I tried to explain it to her, Mom. We didn't want to put her through something that could hurt her physically. It's not like I don't care about her. I know that, she said softly. But Grandma doesn't see it that way. To her, it feels like she's being left behind. I sighed heavily. What do you want me to do? Invite her and risk her having a medical emergency halfway through the reception? No one's asking you to do that, Mom said quickly. But maybe there's a way to meet her halfway. Could you visit her and talk it out face to face? Yeah, I'll think about it, I muttered, knowing full well that a visit might just make things worse. By the end of the week, I was emotionally drained. I hadn't heard back from Grandma, but I kept getting updates through the family grapevine. Apparently, she was still upset and telling anyone who would listen that I'd disrespected her. It was like every conversation I'd had with her over the years, every family memory, was suddenly erased in her mind. Liz and I talked about it late one night after another flurry of texts from cousins. Maybe we should have handled it differently, I said quietly. Maybe we should have just invited her and figured things out later. No, Liz said firmly. We made the right decision for her health. You're not responsible for how other people twist it. You can't control their reactions. I know, I muttered, but it's hard not to feel like the bad guy here. Liz leaned her head on my shoulder. You're not the bad guy. You were trying to protect her. That doesn't make you a villain. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I fully believed it. The tension in the family was reaching a boiling point, and I had no idea how or if it could be resolved. The wedding was a week away when everything blew up. I was at my parents' house helping finalize some last-minute details with my mom. She was working on the seating chart while I was confirming vendors on the phone. Everything was finally coming together after months of stress, but that didn't mean I could relax. There was still this heavy cloud hanging over me, Grandma. I hadn't heard from her since that first conversation, and honestly, part of me was relieved. But I also knew it was the calm before the storm. It wasn't long before the storm hit. We were halfway through arranging the name cards when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Aunt Linda. Again, I groaned and unlocked my phone, expecting another guilt trip or passive-aggressive comment. Instead, it was just one sentence. Grandma wants to talk to you. Now. I showed the text to my mom. She's probably going to rip me apart, I muttered. Mom hesitated, then said softly, Maybe it's time. Just hear her out. She's been carrying this around for weeks. Yeah, and making sure the whole family knows about it, I replied bitterly. Still, I knew she was right. I couldn't dodge this conversation forever. With a deep breath, I stepped outside to make the call. Grandma answered on the second ring. Hello? Her voice was sharp and any warmth I remembered was gone. Hey, Grandma, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Aunt Linda said you wanted to talk. I did, she replied curtly. There was a pause before she added, It's about the wedding. Of course it was. Look, Grandma, I know you're upset. Upset? She interrupted, her voice rising. You think I'm just upset? You didn't even think I was strong enough to be there. You wrote me off like I'm some frail old woman who can't handle being part of her own family's life. That's not fair, I said quickly. We were trying to think about what's best for you. We didn't want you to get hurt or overwhelmed. It wasn't about leaving you out. Oh, please, she snapped. You didn't even give me a choice. You made that decision for me. And now I'm the one who has to sit at home and hear about my own grandchild's wedding secondhand. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Her words hit me harder than I expected. I knew she was hurt, but hearing the raw pain in her voice, it was like a punch to the gut. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I never wanted to make you feel that way. Well, It's too late for that, she replied coldly. You made your choice, and I'm making mine. I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? There was another pause, longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter but no less cutting. I've decided to change my will. I don't see why I should leave anything to someone who doesn't even consider me important enough to be at their wedding. My heart dropped. You're cutting me out of your will? Yes, she said firmly. I've already spoken to my lawyer. I stood there, stunned. Of all the ways this could have gone, I didn't expect this. I couldn't even process what I was feeling. Shock, anger, guilt, it all came crashing down at once. Grandma, come on, I finally managed to say. You're really going to do this over one misunderstanding? I've always loved you, and you know that. Love? She repeated, her voice full of disbelief. Love doesn't look like this. If you loved me, you would have found a way to include me. But instead, you made me feel like an afterthought. That's not true, I snapped, frustration boiling over. We were trying to protect you. I didn't want you to be miserable or have a health scare in the middle of the day. How is that me not loving you? You're just making excuses, she said flatly. You didn't even try. That hit me harder than anything else. I had tried, hadn't I? I'd called her, explained our reasoning, planned to visit her afterward, but maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe I hadn't handled it the right way. Or maybe nothing would have been enough for her. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my emotions in check. I don't know what else you want me to say. I'm sorry you feel this way, but I stand by our decision. We didn't want to hurt you, but we also didn't want to risk your health. I thought you'd understand. Well, you thought wrong, she said coldly. I have nothing else to say to you. Goodbye. The line went dead. I stood outside for a long time after that, just staring at the phone in my hand. The weight of the conversation settled over me like a lead blanket. I didn't know whether to be angry, sad, or just numb. She was rewriting her will. Over this. Was I supposed to beg her to change her mind? Apologize again, even though I'd done everything I could? Liz found me outside a few minutes later. You okay? She asked gently. I shook my head, still in a daze. She's cutting me out of her will. Liz's eyes widened. What? Seriously? Yeah, I said with a bitter laugh. Apparently, not inviting her to the wedding is enough to erase me from the family inheritance. That's extreme, Liz said clearly, at a loss for words. She hesitated before adding, What are you going to do? I don't know, I muttered. Part of me wants to fight her on it, but another part of me is just done. I can't keep defending myself to people who don't want to hear the truth. Liz wrapped her arms around me. You've done everything you could. You don't owe anyone more than that. I nodded, but the knot in my chest wouldn't loosen. No matter how justified I felt, there was still that gnawing guilt, that small voice whispering that maybe I could have handled things differently. Maybe I could have found a way to avoid all this. The wedding day, but it was too late now. Came and went. It was beautiful, better than I had imagined, really. Liz looked incredible. The venue was perfect, and despite all the pre-wedding stress, everyone seemed to have a great time. Our closest friends and family danced, laughed, and celebrated with us late into the night. For a few hours, I let myself get lost in the moment, pretending the drama with Grandma and the rest of the family didn't exist. But it was always there, just beneath the surface, like an itch I couldn't quite scratch. Grandma wasn't there, of course. I tried not to look for her in the crowd or wonder how different things might have been if we'd made another choice, but deep down I couldn't help it. Her absence was like a shadow over the whole day, a reminder that even in moments of joy, some wounds linger. A few days after the wedding, things started to settle down, at least on the surface. Liz and I were catching up on sleep, writing thank you notes, and trying to get back into a normal routine. But the family tension hadn't gone anywhere. It was like everyone was waiting for me to make the next move. I hadn't heard from Grandma since our last conversation. Aunt Linda had gone quiet for once, which was almost more unsettling than her usual drama. Even my mom seemed hesitant to bring up the subject, though I could tell she was itching to say something every time we talked. Finally, about a week after the wedding, my dad called. I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed. Seeing his name on the screen made my stomach twist, but I answered anyway. Hey, Dad, I said, bracing myself. What's up? Hey, kiddo. Just wanted to check in, he said, his voice unusually gentle. How's married life treating you? It's good, I said cautiously. Still getting used to it, but good. Glad to hear it, he replied. There was a pause before he cleared his throat and added, So, I wanted to talk to you about Grandma. Of course. I sighed and sat down on the edge of the bed. What about her? She's still pretty upset, he said carefully. You know how she isons she gets an idea in her head. It's hard to shake. But she's been talking to me and your mom a lot. She's hurt, but I think she's also confused. I don't think she ever really understood why you made that decision. Dad, I tried explaining it to her. I said, my frustration bubbling up again. I called her, I laid it all out, why it wasn't safe for her, why we thought it would be too much. She didn't want to hear it. She decided I was the villain, and that's that. I know, he said quietly. And I'm not saying you did anything wrong, but she's old. She's scared of losing her place in the family. She doesn't always express it the right way, but that's where it's coming from. I leaned back, rubbing my face with both hands. I get that. I do. But I can't keep bending over backward to fix something that wasn't my fault in the first place. I didn't exclude her to be mean. I was trying to protect her. And now, I'm the bad guy. No one thinks you're the bad guy, he said softly. Not really. Everyone's just caught up in their feelings. Maybe it'll take time for people to see things clearly. I let out a slow breath. Time. Yeah, maybe. The weeks that followed were awkward. Relatives kept their distance, like they weren't sure which side to take. Some sent polite texts congratulating us on the wedding, while others stayed silent. Grandma didn't reach out at all. It was like there was this invisible wall between us now, one that neither of us knew how to break. I started to realize something during that time, though this wasn't just about the wedding, it was about family, expectations, and boundaries. Grandma had always seen family as something sacred, something that came before everything else. To her, being excluded from a major event like the wedding wasn't just a logistical issue. It was a betrayal of that unspoken code. But I had a different view. I loved my family, but I wasn't willing to sacrifice my peace of mind or my marriage to keep the peace. I'd spent too much of my life trying to meet everyone's expectations, trying to avoid conflict at all costs. The wedding had forced me to draw a line, and while it hurt to see the fallout, I knew it was a line I needed to hold. A month after the wedding, Mom invited us over for dinner. She didn't say it outright, but I knew the real reason. She wanted me to talk to Grandma. Liz and I debated whether we should go, but in the end, I agreed. I couldn't avoid this forever. When we arrived, Grandma was already there, sitting in her usual spot on the couch. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of everything had physically diminished her. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it down. This conversation wasn't going to be easy for either of us. Hi, Grandma, I said quietly as I walked over. She looked up, her eyes softening just a little. Hi, sweetheart. I sat down across from her, Liz hovering nearby for support. We sat in silence for a few moments before Grandma finally spoke. I didn't think you'd come, she admitted. Neither did I said with a small smile. But I figured it was time. She nodded slowly. I've been thinking about what you said, about the wedding and everything else. I still don't agree with how you handled it, but I suppose I could have listened better. I could have handled it better too, I admitted. I didn't want to hurt you. I was just scared of something happening to you during the wedding. I didn't know how to balance that with everything else going on. Grandma sighed, her shoulders relaxing a little. Maybe we were both too stubborn. Yeah, I said softly. Maybe. The tension between us eased just a bit. It wasn't a full reconciliation, there were still wounds that needed time to heal, but it was a start. As we drove home that night, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The rift in the family wasn't fully mended, but at least we were starting to understand each other again. Boundaries, I realized, didn't have to mean burning bridges. They just meant learning how to protect your own peace while still making space for the people who mattered. It's going to take time, Liz said, as if reading my thoughts. Yeah, I agreed, glancing out the window at the passing streetlights. But at least we're moving in the right direction. What do you think? Was I wrong for leaving Grandma out to protect her health? Or should I have found a way to include her? I'd love to hear your thoughts.